Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a story that sounds impossible until you realize it's completely true. A man who walked into the Alaskan wilderness with nothing but a backpack and stayed there for over 4 decades. No grocery stores, no hospitals, no human contact for months at a time. Just him, the wolves, and a landscape that kills most people within days. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe grab something warm to drink, and let's step into the extraordinary world of Charlie Vandergaal, Alaska's legendary wolfman. Picture this. It's 1973, and a young man from the Enough of Civilization, Minnesota, decides he's not in the way most of us complain about traffic or long work days. Charlie Vandergaal literally walked away from everything modern society had to offer and disappeared into the Brooks Range of northern Alaska. What he found there wasn't just survival, it was something far more profound. The Brooks Range isn't some friendly camping destination. This is a place where temperatures drop to 60 below zero, where grizzly bears roam freely and wolves hunt in coordinated packs, where one wrong step, one miscalculation, one moment of weakness means death. And yet Charlie didn't just survive there, he thrived. But here's what makes his story absolutely incredible. He didn't just endure the wilderness, he became part of it. He learned to think like a wolf, hunt like a wolf, and eventually earned the respect of actual wolf packs. Wild animals that would normally flee from humans began to accept him as something different, something between man and beast. You're about to discover how a regular guy from the Midwest transformed himself into a legend, how he built shelters that could withstand Arctic storms using nothing but hand tools and raw materials, how he hunted caribou with primitive weapons and outsmarted predators that had been perfecting their survival skills for thousands of years. This isn't some romantic wilderness fantasy. This is the raw, unfiltered reality of what it takes to survive alone in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Charlie's story will challenge everything you think you know about human limits, about our connection to nature, and about what we're truly capable of when we strip away every modern convenience. The man who walked into those mountains in 1973 was Charlie Vandergaal, a restless 20-something from Minnesota who felt suffocated by the constraints of modern life. He wasn't running from anything dramatic. No criminal past, no family tragedy, no financial ruin. He was running toward something he couldn't name, but knew he'd recognize when he found it. Charlie had always been different. As a kid, he preferred the woods behind his house to the playground at school. He could sit motionless for hours watching deer graze, studying their movements, learning their patterns, while other children played with toys. Charlie was building primitive shelters and learning to identify edible plants. His family thought it was just a phase. Boys will be boys, they said. He'll grow out of it. But Charlie never grew out of it. If anything, his connection to the natural world grew stronger as he got older. By his teens, He was spending entire weekends alone in the Minnesota wilderness, testing his survival skills, pushing his limits. After high school, Charlie tried to fit into the normal world. He got a job, paid his bills, went through the motions of civilized life. But every day felt like wearing clothes that didn't fit. He'd lie awake at night thinking about vast open spaces, about the sound of wind through pine trees, about the freedom that comes from depending only on yourself and your skills. Then he heard about Alaska, not tourist Alaska, but the real Alaska. The Alaska that existed beyond roads and power lines. A place where a man could disappear completely and find out what he was really made of. The more Charlie learned about the Brooks Range, the more he knew that's where he belonged. The Brooks Range stretches across northern Alaska like a massive wall of granite and ice. It's the northernmost mountain range in North America, a place where the tree line ends and the tundra begins. Most of it lies above the Arctic Circle, where the sun doesn't rise for months during winter and doesn't set for months during summer. This wasn't Charlie's first choice by accident. He specifically sought out one of the most challenging environments on the planet. He wanted to know what he was capable of when stripped of every modern advantage. No GPS, no weather forecasts, no rescue teams standing by. Just him against the elements. The day Charlie left civilization behind wasn't marked by fanfare or ceremony. He simply packed a basic survival kit into a worn backpack, said goodbye to no one in particular, and started walking north. He had enough supplies for maybe 2 weeks if he was careful. After that, he'd either learn to live off the land or he'd die trying. What Charlie found when he reached his destination was a landscape that seemed designed to break human spirit. Endless miles of tundra stretched in every direction, broken only by jagged mountain peaks and frozen rivers. The silence was so complete, it felt like a physical presence. The cold was so intense, it turned breath into ice crystals that fell to the ground with tiny tinkling sounds. Most people would have turned around immediately. The sheer scale of the emptiness, the obvious hostility of the environment, would have sent them running back to the safety of heated buildings and grocery stores. But Charlie felt something different. He felt like he was finally home. His first shelter was nothing more than a lean-to made from fallen branches and caribou hide he'd salvaged from a wolf kill. It leaked when it rained and provided minimal protection from the wind, but it was his. He'd built it with his own hands from materials the land had provided. That first night, as he lay shivering in his inadequate shelter, Charlie realized he'd crossed a line. There was no going back now. The early days were brutal. Charlie made every mistake a wilderness novice could make. He chose poor locations for his camps, wasted energy on unnecessary tasks, and nearly froze to death more times than he cared to count. His food ran out within the first week, hunting forcing him to learn and foraging skills under pressure that could literally mean the difference between life and death. But Charlie had something that kept him going when logic said he should give up. He had an absolute certainty that this was what he was meant to do. Every hardship, every near-death experience, every moment of crushing loneliness only strengthened his resolve. He wasn't just surviving in the wilderness, he was becoming part of it. The first winter nearly killed him. Temperatures dropped so low that his breath froze instantly, creating ice formations inside his shelter. His hands became so numb he could barely grip his tools. Food was scarce, and the few animals that remained active in the extreme cold were either too dangerous to hunt or too clever to catch. Charlie lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. His clothes, inadequate to begin with, began falling apart from constant use and extreme weather. There were nights when he genuinely believed he wouldn't see morning, but somehow he always did. Somehow he always found a way to make it through one more day. It was during that first terrible winter that Charlie began to understand something profound about survival. It wasn't just about having the right gear or knowing the right techniques. It was about changing the way you thought, the way you perceived the world around you. Civilization had taught him to see nature as something to be conquered, or teaching him a controlled. But the wilderness was a different lesson entirely. The against their animals around him weren't fighting environment. They were part of it. They moved with the rhythms of the seasons, adapted their behavior to changing conditions, and found ways to thrive in circumstances that would kill most creatures. Charlie began to study them not just as potential food sources, but as teachers. The wolves fascinated him most of all. He'd catch glimpses of them in the distance, gray shadows moving across the white landscape with purpose and coordination that spoke of intelligence far beyond what most people attributed to wild animals. They seemed to appear and disappear at will, leaving only tracks in the snow to prove they'd been there at all. At first, the wolves avoided Charlie completely. They could smell his human scent from miles away and gave his camps a wide berth. But as months passed and Charlie's own scent began to change, mixing with smoke from his fires and the musk of animal hides, the wolves grew curious about this strange creature that had chosen to live among them. Charlie's first real encounter with a wolf pack happened during his second spring in the wilderness. He was tracking a wounded caribou when he realized he wasn't alone. 3 wolves had been following the same animal, and now all 4 predators found themselves in an unexpected standoff. Most people would have run or tried to scare the wolves away. Charlie didn't either. He simply sat down in the snow and waited to see what would happen. For nearly an hour, man and wolves studied each other across the tundra. Finally, the alpha male approached to within 30 feet of where Charlie sat motionless. What happened next would shape the rest of Charlie's life in the wilderness. The wolf tilted his head, made eye contact with the strange human, and seemed to nod slightly before turning and leading his pack away. But he left the wounded caribou behind. A gift, perhaps, or maybe just an acknowledgement that Charlie had earned the right to be there. That night, as Charlie cooked caribou meat over his fire, he heard howling in the distance. Not the mournful sound most people associate with wolves, but something different. Something that sounded almost like conversation. And for the first time since entering the wilderness, Charlie howled back. The response that came back from the darkness wasn't what Charlie expected. It wasn't a single voice answering his call, but a chorus. Multiple wolves from different directions, their voices weaving together in what sounded like a complex musical arrangement. Charlie sat by his fire mesmerized as the wilderness around him came alive with sound. Over the following weeks, the howling became a nightly ritual. Charlie would call out into the darkness, and the wolves would respond. Gradually, the conversations grew more complex. Different pitches, different rhythms, different emotional tones. Charlie began to recognize individual voices, and more remarkably, they seemed to recognize his. But it wasn't just about the howling. Charlie was learning to read the landscape the way wolves did. He could tell from the direction of the wind where prey animals had passed hours earlier. He learned to identify the subtle signs that indicated a wolf kill nearby, and more importantly, whether the pack had finished feeding or was still in the area. This knowledge saved his life more than once. During his third winter, when starvation was a constant threat, Charlie would follow wolf packs at a respectful distance, waiting for them to make a kill. When they'd eaten their fill and moved on, he'd approach the carcass and take what remained. It was a delicate balance. Take too much, and you'd anger the pack. Take too little, and you'd starve. The wolves began to tolerate his presence in ways that defied everything experts thought they knew about wolf behavior. Wild wolves don't associate with humans. They certainly don't share territory or resources. But Charlie wasn't behaving like a typical human anymore. He moved quietly through their world, took only what he needed, and showed the kind of respect that wolves understand. By his fourth year in the wilderness, something unprecedented happened. A young wolf, separated from his pack during a blizzard, approached Charlie's shelter. The animal was injured, limping badly on his right front paw. Any normal wolf would have hidden, suffered in silence, and either recovered or died alone. But this wolf seemed to understand that the strange human who howled in the darkness might be able to help. Charlie named him Gray. Not very original, but fitting for a wolf whose coat was the exact color of winter storm clouds. Gray's paw had been caught in what looked like a leg-hold trap, probably left behind by trappers from decades past. The wound had become infected, and without treatment, the wolf would certainly die. What Charlie did next violated every piece of advice ever given about wild animal encounters. He approached the injured wolf slowly, talking in the same low tones he'd heard wolves use with their own pack members. Gray didn't run. Instead, he lay down and exposed his injured paw as if he understood exactly what Charlie intended to do. Treating a wild wolf with nothing but primitive tools and basic medical knowledge sounds impossible. But Charlie had been learning from the wolves themselves. He'd observed how they cleaned wounds by licking them, how they found certain plants that seemed to have healing properties, how they rested and recovered from injuries. Using techniques that were part veterinary medicine, part ancient wisdom, and part pure intuition, Charlie cleaned Gray's wound and applied poultices made from plants he'd seen other animals seek out when they were hurt. He created a shelter within his shelter, a safe space where Gray could recover without feeling trapped or threatened. The healing process took weeks. During that time, Charlie and Gray developed a relationship unlike anything documented in wildlife research. They weren't master and pet. They weren't even friends in the human sense. They were something new. Two different species who had learned to communicate across the ancient divide between wild and civilized. Gray's pack knew where he was. They would call to him from the ridges above Charlie's camp, and he would answer back. But they didn't approach to retrieve him. It was as if they understood that their pack member was receiving help from a creature they'd come to trust, and they were willing to wait. When Gray finally recovered and rejoined his pack, he didn't simply disappear back into the wilderness. He became Charlie's ambassador to the wolf world. Other wolves began to approach Charlie's camps with less caution, not seeking help or handouts, but acknowledging his presence as something acceptable in their territory. Word of Charlie's unique relationship with wolves began to spread beyond the wilderness. Bush pilots flying over the Brooks Range reported seeing a lone human traveling alongside wolf packs. Trappers working the outer edges of Charlie's territory found campsites that showed evidence of both human and wolf occupation. The stories grew with each telling, as stories do, until Charlie Vandergaw became something of a legend. But Charlie himself remained largely unaware of his growing reputation. He was too busy learning, adapting, and pushing deeper into skills that separated him from his former civilized life. His shelters became more sophisticated, incorporating techniques he'd observed from various animals. His hunting abilities reached levels that seemed almost supernatural to outside observers. He could track a caribou across terrain that showed no obvious signs of passage. He could predict weather changes days in advance by reading subtle shifts in animal behavior. He could find food sources that sustained him through the harshest winters when most creatures had either migrated south or gone into hibernation. The physical transformation was just as remarkable as the mental one. Years of extreme conditions had changed Charlie's body into something barely recognizable as the Minnesota office worker he'd once been. His hands had become thick and calloused, capable of working in sub-zero temperatures without gloves. His feet had toughened to the point where he could walk across rough terrain in makeshift footwear without injury. His senses had sharpened beyond normal human ranges. He could hear the approach of animals from distances that seemed impossible. He could smell changes in weather patterns, identify different species by scent alone, and detect the presence of other humans from miles away. His eyes had adapted to the extreme light conditions of the Arctic, functioning equally well in the endless daylight of summer and the prolonged darkness of winter. But perhaps the most significant change was in how Charlie thought about time itself. Civilization runs on schedules, deadlines, and artificial divisions of hours and minutes. The wilderness operates on entirely different rhythms. Seasonal cycles, animal migration patterns, weather systems that unfold over weeks or months. Charlie learned to think in these larger time frames, planning not just for the next day or week, but for entire seasons ahead. This long-term thinking became crucial during his 7th year in the wilderness, when he faced his greatest challenge yet. Climate patterns shifted in ways that disrupted the normal cycles he'd learned to depend on. Winter came earlier and lasted longer than usual. Caribou migration routes changed, leaving him without his primary food source during critical months. Many of the wolves in his area faced the same crisis. Prey animals were scarce, and the extended winter put enormous stress on predator populations. Charlie watched pack after pack struggle with hunger, their numbers diminishing as the weakest members succumbed to starvation and cold. It was during this crisis that Charlie made a decision that would define the rest of his wilderness career. Instead of hoarding resources for his own survival, he began actively helping the wolf packs in his territory. When he made a successful hunt, he would leave portions of the meat at strategic locations where hungry wolves could find them. When he discovered new food sources, he would lead wolves to them through a complex system of howls and scent markers. This behavior went against every survival instinct humans possess. In times of scarcity, the rational response is to protect your own resources at all costs. But Charlie had learned to think like a pack animal. He understood that his survival was interconnected with the health of the entire ecosystem around him. The wolves responded to his generosity in ways that amazed even Charlie. They began bringing him gifts in return, fresh kills they would share, unusual objects they'd found during their travels, and most remarkably, information. Wolves have an intelligence network that spans vast territories. They know where food can be found, where dangers lurk, where weather patterns are developing. By accepting Charlie as a pack member of sorts, they began sharing this critical survival information with him. By his 10th year in the wilderness, Charlie had achieved something unprecedented in human history. He had become a functioning member of multiple wolf packs simultaneously, not as a leader or even as a subordinate, but as something entirely new. A human who could bridge the gap between species, communicating in ways that transcended the normal boundaries between wild and civilized. His reputation in the outside world continued to grow, though Charlie remained largely oblivious to it. Documentarians began seeking him out, hoping to capture his story on film. Scientists wanted to study his unique relationship with wild wolves. Government officials debated whether his presence in protected wilderness areas should be allowed to continue. But Charlie had no interest in fame or scientific recognition. He had found what he'd been searching for when he first walked into the Brooks Range all those years ago. He had found his place in the natural world, his purpose, his home. The man who had once felt suffocated by civilization had become something that civilization could barely understand. The lessons he learned during those first crucial years of survival would serve him well in the decades to come. Because Charlie's story was just beginning. The real adventures, the most incredible encounters, the most death-defying challenges still lay ahead. He had mastered the basics of wilderness survival. Now he would discover what it truly meant to live wild. The transformation wasn't just physical or mental. Something deeper was happening to Charlie, something that would have terrified most people, but filled him with a sense of completion he'd never experienced in civilization. He was losing his humanity in the traditional sense and gaining something else entirely. Something that existed in the space between human and animal, between civilized and wild. By his 12th year in the wilderness, Charlie could go weeks without speaking a single word aloud. Language itself became unnecessary when you could communicate through scent markers, body position, and the subtle art of reading environmental cues. The wolves had taught him that words were often just noise, that true communication happened in the spaces between sounds. His shelters during this period became architectural marvels of wilderness engineering. Using techniques borrowed from beaver lodges, bird nests, and bear dens, Charlie constructed living spaces that could withstand the most brutal Arctic storms while remaining nearly invisible to passing aircraft. These weren't simple survival shelters anymore. They were homes that seemed to grow from the landscape itself. The main cabin he built during his 13th winter defied every conventional wisdom about wilderness construction. Instead of fighting against the environment, it embraced it. The structure was partially underground, carved into a hillside and reinforced with stones that had been shaped by countless freeze-thaw cycles. The roof was a living thing, covered with soil and vegetation that provided both insulation and camouflage. Inside, the space was organized with the efficiency of a wolf den. Everything had its place, its purpose, its season. Meat caches were dug deep enough to remain frozen year-round. Tool storage was arranged by frequency of use and seasonal necessity. Sleeping areas were positioned to take advantage of natural air circulation patterns that kept the space warm without wasting precious fuel. But the most remarkable feature wasn't visible to the casual observer. Charlie had incorporated a complex ventilation system that allowed him to maintain small fires even during the worst blizzards without filling the shelter with smoke or depleting oxygen levels. The technique came from years of studying how various animals managed airflow in their underground homes. Water was perhaps the greatest engineering challenge. Charlie solved it by creating an elaborate system of ice harvesting and melting that provided fresh water year-round without requiring him to venture outside during dangerous weather. He'd learned from watching how certain Arctic animals cached ice in specific locations where it would remain frozen but accessible. The psychological challenges of this period were perhaps greater than the physical ones. Humans are social creatures, evolved to live in groups, to share experiences through language, to find meaning through connection with others. Charlie was voluntarily cutting himself off from all of that, choosing instead a form of existence that no human had ever attempted for such an extended period. Loneliness became his constant companion, but not in the way most people would expect. It wasn't the crushing depression that might drive someone to madness. Instead, it was a presence unto itself, something to be acknowledged, understood, and ultimately integrated into his daily existence. Charlie learned to have conversations with the loneliness, to treat it as another member of his strange pack. The seasons began to blur together in ways that would have been impossible in civilization. Winter preparation started during the height of summer. Spring planning began before winter had fully released its grip. Charlie's mind operated on cycles that spanned years rather than days, his consciousness expanding to encompass time frames that dwarfed human attention spans. During his 15th year, Charlie experienced something that challenged every assumption he'd held about the boundaries between species. He was tracking a wounded moose through dense timber when he realized he was being followed by a pack of wolves he didn't recognize. These weren't the familiar faces he'd grown to know over the years. These were strangers, and their body language suggested they weren't entirely comfortable with his presence. The standoff lasted for hours. Charlie continued following the moose's trail while the wolves shadowed him from a respectful distance. Neither party was willing to abandon the hunt, but neither wanted to escalate the situation into open conflict. It was a delicate dance of predators, each trying to determine the other's intentions. When Charlie finally caught up with the moose, he found it had collapsed in a small clearing, too weak from blood loss to continue. The ethical thing would have been to put the animal out of its misery quickly. But Charlie hesitated, sensing that this moment was about more than just a simple hunt. The wolves emerged from the tree line one by one, moving with the careful precision of experienced hunters. The alpha male approached to within 20 feet of where Charlie stood beside the dying moose. For several minutes, neither human nor wolf moved. They simply studied each other, each trying to read the intentions of a creature they didn't fully understand. What happened next defied every piece of conventional wisdom about wolf behavior. The alpha stepped back and made a subtle gesture with his head, a movement so slight that most humans would have missed it entirely. But Charlie had been studying wolf communication for over a decade. He recognized the signal immediately. The pack was inviting him to make the kill. The honor was unprecedented. Wolves don't share hunting privileges with outsiders. They certainly don't defer to other species when it comes to making kills. But these wolves had somehow recognized Charlie as something more than human, something worthy of respect within their social structure. Charlie made the kill quickly and efficiently, using techniques he'd learned from watching wolves themselves. The moment the moose stopped breathing, the entire dynamic of the clearing changed. What had been a tense standoff became something resembling a celebration. The wolves approached the carcass with the casual confidence of pack members sharing a successful hunt. The butchering and distribution of meat followed protocols that Charlie had observed but never participated in directly. The alpha male and female took the choice cuts first, as was their right. But instead of relegating Charlie to the scraps, they indicated that he should take his share alongside the senior pack members. He had been granted a status within the pack hierarchy that no human had ever achieved. That night, as Charlie cooked his portion of the meat over a small fire, the wolves settled down around his camp in a loose circle. They didn't approach the fire itself, but they made no effort to maintain their usual distance. For the first time in over 15 years of wilderness living, Charlie didn't sleep alone. The experience marked a turning point in Charlie's relationship with the wilderness. He had crossed a threshold that separated him not just from civilization, but from humanity itself. He had become something new, something that existed in the spaces between categories that humans use to organize their understanding of the world. Word of these unprecedented encounters began to filter out of the wilderness through the few people who had brief contact with Charlie. Bush pilots reported seeing him traveling with wolf packs, moving across the landscape with the same fluid coordination that characterized pack hunts. Trappers found evidence of camps that showed both human and wolf occupation, with no signs of conflict or dominance. The scientific community was divided on whether to believe these reports. The behavior described went against everything researchers thought they knew about wolf psychology and pack dynamics. Wolves simply didn't accept outsiders, especially not humans. The idea that a person could achieve genuine membership in wild pack structures seemed impossible. But the evidence continued to accumulate. Photographs taken from aircraft showed a figure moving alongside wolf packs across open tundra. Tracking studies revealed movement patterns that suggested coordination between human and wolf activities. Most remarkably, audio recordings captured vocalizations that seemed to represent genuine communication between species. Charlie himself remained unaware of the scientific interest his lifestyle had generated. He was too busy living a reality that exceeded the wildest dreams of wildlife researchers. His daily existence had become a continuous dialogue with the natural world, a conversation conducted in languages that predated human speech by millions of years. The hunting partnerships that developed during this period represented perhaps the most sophisticated interspecies cooperation ever documented. Charlie and various wolf packs developed strategies that took advantage of each species' unique capabilities. Wolves provided the speed and coordination necessary to drive prey animals toward specific locations. Charlie provided the tools and techniques needed to bring down large game that might otherwise escape. These cooperative hunts were marvels of tactical planning and execution. Charlie would study terrain for days in advance, identifying natural funnel points where prey animals could be cornered. The wolves would coordinate their approach from multiple directions, using their superior speed and endurance to herd caribou or moose toward the predetermined killing ground. The timing had to be perfect. Too early, and the prey would escape before reaching the optimal location. Too late, and the opportunity would be lost as animals scattered in unpredictable directions. Charlie learned to read the subtle signals that wolves used to coordinate their movements, integrating his own actions into pack hunting strategies that had been refined over thousands of years of evolution. The success rate of these cooperative hunts far exceeded what either Charlie or the wolves could achieve hunting alone. But more importantly, the partnerships represented a form of interspecies communication that challenged fundamental assumptions about the barriers between human and animal consciousness. Charlie began to understand that intelligence took many forms, most of which were completely alien to human ways of thinking. Wolf intelligence wasn't inferior to human intelligence. It was simply different, adapted to different challenges, expressed through different behaviors. By learning to think like a wolf, Charlie gained access to forms of awareness that no purely human consciousness could achieve. The sensory world that opened up to him during this period was unlike anything described in human literature. His sense of smell developed to the point where he could track individual wolves by scent alone, distinguishing between pack members and identifying emotional states through subtle changes in pheromone production. His hearing became so acute that he could detect the approach of animals from distances that seemed impossible to outside observers. But perhaps most remarkably, Charlie developed what could only be described as a sixth sense for predicting animal behavior. He seemed to know instinctively where prey animals would be found, which routes they would take when fleeing, how they would react to various hunting strategies. This wasn't learned behavior or accumulated experience. It was something deeper, a form of intuitive knowledge that seemed to bypass conscious thought entirely. The implications of these abilities extended far beyond simple survival skills. Charlie had tapped into forms of awareness that modern humans had lost millennia ago, when our ancestors first began building permanent settlements and separating themselves from the natural world. He had recovered cognitive abilities that existed before language, before tools, before the development of abstract thought. Living at this level of integration frameworks that define human consciousness, abandoning many of the mental with the natural world, require concepts like past and future became less relevant than immediate sensory input. The distinction between self and environment blurred until Charlie's identity expanded to include the landscape around him, the animals that shared his territory, the weather patterns that shaped daily existence. This expansion of consciousness came at a cost. The more deeply Charlie integrated with the wilderness, the more difficult it became for him to relate to human ways of thinking. On the rare occasions when he encountered other people, usually bush pilots or researchers who managed to locate his camps, communication became increasingly challenging. Human language began to feel clumsy and imprecise compared to the subtle forms of communication he'd learned from the wolves. Words seemed to create artificial barriers between ideas that flowed together naturally in nonverbal consciousness. The rapid pace of human speech felt jarring after years of existing in the slower rhythms of natural time. But these encounters with the outside world also served an important purpose. They reminded Charlie that he was walking a path no human had ever walked before, pushing the boundaries of what was possible for his species. Each interaction with civilization reinforced his commitment to the experiment he was conducting with his own consciousness and capabilities. By his 20th year in the wilderness, Charlie had achieved a form of existence that defied every category researchers might use to classify it. He wasn't a hermit hiding from society. He wasn't a primitive human reverting to ancestral ways of life. He was something entirely new, a hybrid consciousness that bridged the gap between human and animal awareness. The physical demands of this lifestyle continued to push his body beyond normal human limits. Decades of extreme conditions had transformed him into something that barely resembled the office worker who had walked into the Brooks Range so many years earlier. His strength, endurance, and resilience had reached levels that seemed almost superhuman to outside observers. But the most remarkable changes weren't visible to the naked eye. Charlie's metabolism had adapted to extreme temperature fluctuations in ways that medical science couldn't fully explain. His body could maintain core temperature in conditions that would send most people into hypothermic shock within minutes. His digestive system had learned to extract maximum nutrition from foods that would be considered inedible by civilized standards. His sleep patterns had evolved to match the extreme light cycles of the Arctic. During the months of endless daylight, Charlie could function on brief periods of rest scattered throughout the day. During the polar night, when darkness reigned for months at a time, his body entered a state of conservation that allowed him to survive on minimal resources while maintaining mental alertness. The psychological adaptations were equally profound. Charlie had developed what could only be described as a predator's mindset, a way of thinking that was simultaneously patient and opportunistic. He could wait motionless for hours when react was necessary, but lightning speed when opportunities presented themselves. This mental flexibility had become as crucial to his survival as any physical skill. His understanding of weather patterns had reached an almost mystical level of accuracy. Charlie could predict storms days in advance by reading signs that were invisible to trained meteorologists. The behavior of insects, the direction of wind currents, the way light reflected off distant mountains, all became part of an intricate forecasting system that kept him alive during the most dangerous seasons. The territory he now claimed as his own had expanded to cover hundreds of square miles. Charlie maintained multiple camps strategically positioned throughout this range, each designed for specific seasons and purposes. Some were winter shelters built for maximum protection against Arctic storms. Others were summer bases positioned near hunting grounds or water sources. Moving between these camps required navigation skills that went far beyond simple map reading. Charlie had memorized the landscape in 3 dimensions, understanding how terrain looked different under various light conditions, weather patterns, and seasonal changes. He could travel between distant points in complete darkness or whiteout conditions, guided by subtle landmarks that would be meaningless to anyone else. And so, Charlie Vandergall proved that the boundaries between human and wild aren't as fixed as we believe. For over 4 decades, he redefined what it means to be human, showing us that survival isn't about conquering nature, but becoming part of it. His story challenges everything we think we know about our own limits and reminds us that somewhere inside each of us lies the capacity for extraordinary transformation. Sweet dreams, and remember what's possible when you truly let go of everything you think defines you.